My brother called me a financial idiot at his wedding reception in front of 200 people, not realizing I owned 81% of voting shares in his venture capital firm and was about to have him removed as CEO. The reception was at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, and the open bar was flowing. Marcus was 3 drinks deep, the kind of drunk that makes everything feel like performance art. He had his arm around his new wife Emma, and he was working the room like he'd just invented money. She doesn't know the first thing about money, he announced to a cluster of his venture capital colleagues, gesturing toward me with his champagne flute. My sister Sarah. Totally clueless. She still thinks a bond is something you have with people. I was dancing. Actually dancing. Trying to enjoy my brother's wedding despite the fact that I knew exactly who he was, and it wasn't the person he was pretending to be. The group around him laughed. These were successful people, CEOs, investors, Stanford graduates. People who presumably understood humor and irony and the danger of making confident statements about people you didn't actually know. But they laughed anyway. I mean, she works in graphic design, Marcus continued, his voice loud enough that several more people started turning to listen. She's creative, sure. But business? Finance? Investing? These are not her lanes. She's literally the kind of person I would advise to just put her money in an index fund and stop trying to understand how markets work. His wife Emma laughed. She was new money, her father had made his fortune in real estate, and she was still learning how to be someone's spouse in this world. She probably thought his commentary about me was affectionate. Probably thought it was the kind of thing brothers said about sisters. It wasn't. Our mother was standing nearby, and she looked embarrassed. She caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." But she didn't do anything. She didn't tell Marcus to stop. She didn't defend me. She just stood there and let her son publicly humiliate her other child. Marcus's colleagues were eating it up. They were laughing and nodding like Marcus had just said something incredibly insightful. One of them, a venture capitalist named David, even added his own commentary, "That's why we let guys like your brother handle the money, Sarah. Some people are just wired for business, and some people are wired for other things." I kept dancing. But I was documenting. I was remembering. I was making mental notes of which people found Marcus's mockery entertaining. Which people thought it was funny to belittle someone they'd never even had a conversation with. This would matter later. When I was making decisions about the company. When I was deciding who to keep and who to remove. The people who'd laughed at my expense would not be part of the future I was building. I knew Marcus. I'd known him my entire life. I knew that he needed to feel smarter than everyone in the room. I knew that he accomplished this by making other people feel smaller. And I knew that he would have absolutely no idea that his brand new venture capital firm, Hartley Investment Group, valued at approximately $400 million, was actually controlled by me. Because while Marcus had been spending his time making impressive deals and collecting trophies and building a public persona, I'd been quietly buying shares. Let me back up. Let me explain who I actually am. My name is Sarah Hartley, and I'm 32 years old. I have a bachelor's degree in economics from Berkeley and an MBA from Northwestern. I worked at Goldman Sachs for 7 years before I left to pursue my own investment strategy. Over the past 5 years, I built a private portfolio worth $180 million through a combination of tech investments, real estate speculation, and strategic venture capital stakes. I'm an exceptional investor. I understand markets. I understand psychology. I understand how money flows and where it accumulates and how to identify opportunities that most people miss. I also understand people. I understand my brother. When he started Hartley Investment Group 2 years ago, I immediately recognized what was going to happen. He'd make some good investments based on raw instinct and borrowed intelligence from his team. Those would generate returns. Those returns would make him confident. Confidence would lead him to make terrible decisions based on ego instead of analysis. And eventually, those terrible decisions would damage the company. But there was a window. A window where the company was still valuable, still growing, still healthy. A window where I could acquire controlling interest before the inevitable decline happened. My brother, on the other hand, is good at appearing smart. He's good at talking. He's good at convincing people to give him money. But he's not actually a sophisticated investor. His venture capital firm had made some good bets, sure, but it had also made terrible ones. And it was being propped up by a combination of luck and his own tendency to talk his way out of criticism. I could see it. I could see exactly where he was headed. And I could see exactly how to position myself to stop him from destroying what he'd built. 6 months ago, when Hartley Investment Group began its first significant capital raise, I started acquiring shares. I used shell companies and trust structures and various corporate entities to hide my involvement. I wanted Marcus to have no idea that I was acquiring his company. I wanted him to stay confident. I wanted him to think he was invincible. The shell companies had names like Blackwell Capital Management and Sterling Investment Holdings and various other variations that didn't immediately connect to me. I used lawyers and accountants and investment brokers who understood the value of discretion. I had them acquire shares on the secondary market, small purchases that wouldn't trigger attention, distributed across multiple months and multiple buyers. By the time the raise was complete, I owned 81% of the voting shares. I also had positioned myself to replace him on the board. I had identified board members who were growing uncomfortable with his management style. I had cultivated relationships with major shareholders. I had created a structure where removing him as CEO would be not just possible, but inevitable. And then he called me a financial idiot at his wedding. The reception continued. Marcus told more jokes about my incompetence. He made comments about how he actually had to teach me how compound interest works, and how I should just stick to design and leave finance to the people who understand it. Every joke was tracked. Every comment was documented in my mind. This was the pattern of someone who'd spent his entire life using mockery as a weapon. It was the pattern of someone who needed other people to be small so he could feel large. I kept dancing. And then, at 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was an email from Richard Blackwell, the board chairman of Hartley Investment Group. Richard was a former venture capitalist who'd been through multiple exits. He understood both business and the human element of business. He was exactly the kind of board chairman who could manage the transition I was about to orchestrate. Sarah, the email read, "We have a situation that requires immediate attention. I've learned this evening that you control 81% of voting shares through Blackwell Capital Management. The board is prepared to move forward with the executive transition we discussed. Please advise on timing." The timing was now. While Marcus was still at his own wedding. While he was still intoxicated. While he was still in the mindset of feeling invincible. I excused myself from the dance floor. I went into the hotel hallway and I called Richard. "Tell him now," I said. "Tell him tonight." "Are you sure?" Richard asked. "This is his wedding reception. This seems cruel." "He spent 4 hours mocking me at his own wedding," I said. "He called me financially incompetent in front of his colleagues. He needed to understand tonight, while he's still in that space, that his understanding of me was completely wrong. He needed to understand that mockery has consequences." "I understand," Richard said. "I'll arrange it." Richard called the hotel manager. He requested a private conference room. He asked them to find Marcus and tell him there was an urgent business matter requiring his attention. Marcus showed up 15 minutes later, annoyed and confused. His new bride wasn't with him. She was still on the dance floor, blissfully unaware that her new husband was about to have his world rearranged. It was just Marcus and Richard in that sterile hotel conference room, with me on speakerphone and a camera set up so I could see his face as it transformed. "Marcus," Richard said, "we need to discuss your position at Hartley Investment Group." "What?" Marcus said. "Richard, I'm getting married. Can this wait?" "No," I said, and my voice came through the speakerphone crystal clear. "It can't." "Sarah?" Marcus was confused. "Why are you on this call?" "Because," Richard said carefully, "the voting shares in Hartley Investment Group are controlled by Blackwell Capital Management. And Blackwell Capital Management is controlled by your sister." I watched Marcus's face transform through the camera that Richard had set up in the conference room. Confusion. Dawning realization. Horror. "That's not possible," he said. "You can't own controlling interest in my company." "I would have known. I would have been notified." "You should have been," I agreed. "But you weren't paying attention. You were too busy building your public persona and making jokes about how stupid everyone else is. You didn't notice that a trust called Blackwell Capital Management was systematically acquiring your shares through the secondary market. You didn't notice that I'd positioned board members who were loyal to me. You didn't notice any of it." "This is fraud," Marcus said. "No," Richard corrected. "It's business. Your sister is a sophisticated investor. She identified an opportunity. She took it. And now she's exercising her legal right as majority shareholder to change the company's direction." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, though I think he already knew. "It means you're being replaced as CEO," I said. "Effective immediately. You can resign gracefully, maintain your current equity position, and transition to an advisory role. Or we can terminate you for cause based on the fraudulent investor communications we've documented. Your choice." Marcus looked like I'd physically struck him. "You can't do this," he said. "I can," I said. "And I am." Marcus tried to fight it. He hired lawyers. Expensive lawyers. The kind of lawyers that people with wealth hire when they're desperate. His lawyers argued that my acquisition of shares was somehow predatory or unfair, or that the board had acted outside its authority. They argued that I'd committed fraud by hiding my identity. They argued that the board had no right to remove him as CEO without his consent. None of it worked. I had documentation of every share purchase. All of it legal. All of it disclosed through proper channels. I had board meeting minutes showing unanimous votes for the executive transition. I had evidence of Marcus's own misrepresentations to investors about the company's performance and direction. I had communications from him claiming investment success that he knew was overstated. By the time my lawyers were done with him, Marcus didn't have a legal leg to stand on. His lawyer actually told him that continuing to fight would only increase his legal bills and wouldn't change the outcome. The board had acted legally. The share acquisition had been legal. And the removal as CEO was legal. He resigned. He took the advisory role. He stayed on as a minority equity holder. And the wedding reception, the one where he'd made jokes about my financial incompetence, became the last night he ever worked as CEO of Hartley Investment Group. I installed a new management team. I brought in executives who actually understood the market. People from top-tier firms. People with successful track records. I made strategic changes to the company's investment thesis. I eliminated the intuition-based approach and replaced it with data-driven analysis. I brought in transparency to areas that had been opaque under Marcus's leadership. I also changed the culture. I made it clear that mockery and public humiliation would not be tolerated. I hired people who were secure enough in their own abilities that they didn't need to diminish others to feel good about themselves. Within a year, Hartley Investment Group was performing better than it ever had under Marcus's leadership. The company made 3 successful exits in the first year I was in charge. The portfolio became diversified and stable. The team was functioning at a level that hadn't been possible under Marcus's leadership. 2 years after I took over, the company was valued at $580 million. By year 3, $750 million. By year 5, we'd crossed the billion-dollar threshold. The company was thriving. Marcus watched this from the sidelines. He had his equity stake, which was now worth significantly more than it had been when he was CEO. His minority stake meant that as the company appreciated, his net worth increased substantially. But he had no authority. No voice. No control. No ability to influence the company's direction. He'd been removed completely. And the irony was that his stake was now worth more money than it had ever been. He'd just lost the power to decide what happened with that money. 6 months after the wedding, I ran into Marcus at a coffee shop in Palo Alto. He looked diminished somehow. Smaller. Like someone had removed some essential part of his confidence and hadn't bothered to replace it. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was different. Humbler. "Marcus," I replied. "I've been thinking about what you did," he said. "About the wedding. About the company." I waited. "I deserve what happened," he continued. "I mocked you. I made you the target of my jokes. And I was completely oblivious to what you were actually building. I underestimated you. And it cost me." "Yes," I agreed. "You did. And it did." "I was wondering if there was any possibility of reconciliation," he said. "If I could ever rebuild a relationship with you." I thought about that. About the brother who'd spent years making me smaller to feel bigger. About the brother who'd publicly humiliated me at his wedding. About the brother who'd owned a successful company but had run it into mediocrity through ego and arrogance. "I don't know," I said honestly. "You'd have to do a lot of internal work to understand why you needed to mock people to feel good about yourself. And that work would take years. And I'm not willing to wait around while you figure it out." "I understand," Marcus said quietly. "But," I continued, "I'm willing to have a professional relationship. You're still on my board as an advisor. You're still an equity holder in a successful company. You have the opportunity to learn from people who know how to actually run a business. Take it or don't." Marcus nodded. He thanked me. He left. 2 years later, Marcus had actually done the work. He'd been in therapy. He'd learned about his insecurity and where it came from. He'd learned to recognize when he was using mockery as a defense mechanism. He'd learned to be genuinely happy for other people's success instead of threatened by it. We rebuilt a relationship. Not close, exactly. But respectful. Based on mutual understanding rather than mutual resentment. He even apologized for the wedding comments. A real apology. One that acknowledged what he'd done and why, not just one that was designed to make me forgive him. I accepted it. I still think about that wedding reception sometimes. I think about how close I came to just letting the comments go. Just accepting that my brother was going to mock me in front of his colleagues. And that nobody was going to defend me and that I should probably just make peace with being the punchline in his narrative. But I didn't let it go. I'd already been acquiring his shares. I'd already been positioning myself to remove him. His comments at the wedding were just the final confirmation that removing him was the right decision. The board chairman called him during his reception. Told him that his sister controlled his company. Told him that he was being replaced. And that moment when Marcus's face registered the reality that his little sister, the financial idiot, actually understood money far better than he did. That moment made everything worth it. Not because I wanted to hurt him. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I needed him to understand that underestimating people is dangerous. Mocking people is dangerous. Building your identity on being smarter than everyone else is dangerous. And sometimes, the person you're mocking is actually the one holding all the power. You just don't realize it until it's too late. Until the board chairman is calling you during your wedding reception. Until you realizing that the company you thought was yours has actually been controlled by someone else for months. Until you understand that every joke you made about someone's incompetence was actually just revealing your own lack of perception. Marcus had called me a financial idiot. He'd said I didn't understand money. He'd told his wedding guests that business and finance were not my lanes. But I controlled 81% of his company. I understood the market better than he ever would. I could see opportunities that he couldn't see. I could predict outcomes that he couldn't predict. And I had positioned myself to take control of everything he'd built. That's the real lesson here. Not that I got revenge on my brother. Not that I humiliated him the way he'd humiliated me. But that quiet competence will always outmatch loud arrogance in the long run. You can mock people. You can make jokes about their intelligence. You can build your entire personality around being the smartest person in the room. But if you're not actually paying attention, if you're not actually watching the market and understanding where the money is going and recognizing opportunities, then you're going to lose. You're going to lose to the person you mocked. You're going to lose to the person you dismissed. You're going to lose to the person who was too quiet to make a fuss about being underestimated, but too smart to let that underestimation go unanswered. That's what happened to Marcus. And that's why, when the board chairman called him at his wedding, the first thing he understood was that he'd been completely wrong about me all along. The end.